Have you ever walked into a room and felt like the silence was louder than any voice? Like every eye held a question, and every breath held back a judgment? That was the room he stepped into. No salutes. No handshakes. Just the echo of his own footsteps, and a name that no longer carried honor, only accusation. They said he let 12 young soldiers die. That in the chaos of war, he chose wrong. And now, decades after medals had faded and uniforms had been folded away, he stood alone, at a defense table, not a battlefield. The courtroom wasn't full of strangers. It was full of parents. Of mothers who once packed sandwiches in lunchboxes, now gripping folded letters in their purses. Of fathers who taught their boys to throw a ball, now staring at the man they believed let them die. General Howard Mason didn't come in with a lawyered-up entourage. He walked in slowly, shoulders no longer straight like they used to be. Not from shame, but from the weight of memory. He looked neither proud nor broken. Just tired. The kind of tired that no sleep could fix. Across from him sat a military prosecutor, young and sharp, voice firm when he read the charges: negligence under fire, dereliction of duty, failure to protect those under command. Each word fell like gravel on stone. The room didn't move. No coughs, no whispers, only a kind of stillness that wrapped around the walls. Then, from the back of the room, a voice broke the quiet, not loud, but steady. It belonged to an old man, his uniform faded, but his eyes clear. "If we're going to judge the general," he said, "then let's hear his final order." And for the first time since the trial began, the judge nodded, not to a lawyer, not to a witness, but to the man behind the sound technician. He pressed play. And in the next few seconds, the room would remember that even silence has a voice. Ellis Dunbar hadn't worn his uniform in years. But on that day, as he sat quietly in the witness chair, the crease in his slacks was sharp, and his tie was military blue. He was 68 now. The last time he saw General Mason was in a valley of dust and smoke, back when Ellis was a recon sergeant, lean and fast, with the weight of a map and 12 lives in his pack. The courtroom lights weren't as harsh as the desert sun, but Ellis still squinted like he was looking for movement on a ridgeline. He cleared his throat once. Then spoke, not like someone giving a statement, but like someone remembering something that never really left him. He wasn't loud, Ellis said. Didn't bark orders. Didn't need to. When Mason walked the line, you stood straighter. Not 'cause he asked. Just because he was watching. There were murmurs in the gallery, but the judge didn't stop him. Ellis looked down for a second, then back up. You ever seen a general take the rear position in a night march? Last one through the mud. Last one into cover. He never said why. Just did it. He paused again. His voice caught, but not from nerves. From weight. He walked like he carried something heavy. Not his gear. Something else. Something you couldn't see. The prosecutor leaned forward. Sergeant Dunbar, with all due respect, this case is about 12 dead men. Loyalty doesn't absolve responsibility. Ellis turned to him, slow and even. I'm not here to absolve, he said. I'm here to remind you who he was before the lawyers came. There was no outburst. No dramatics. Just silence. The kind that settles in after something true has been said. And for a moment, even those who came to judge seemed to remember that before this man was an accused, he was a leader. And some men followed him, not out of command, but out of trust. The fog that morning wasn't just weather. It was thick and heavy, clinging to every branch and bootlace like something alive. The kind of fog that made the world small, like you were walking through cotton soaked in silence. It rolled in just before dawn, swallowing the narrow forest trail and cutting visibility down to a few feet. General Mason stood just outside the command tent, helmet tucked under one arm, radio receiver in the other. The night had been quiet, too quiet, Ellis had thought at the time, but the quiet didn't last. A runner from the comms post brought the update: movement on the north flank, possible insurgent force, fast moving. The extraction had to be accelerated. The message was clear. All units to begin withdrawal immediately. No deviation. Alpha Squad's position non-responsive. Proceed without. Mason didn't move at first. He looked at the young lieutenant who relayed the order, Lieutenant Harris, barely 24, with a streak of sweat cutting through the dust on his face. "They're not responding?" Mason asked, voice low. "No, sir. Last check-in was 2 hours ago. No signal since. Could be dead radios. Or worse." A long pause. Not the kind that comes from indecision, but from calculation. Mason wasn't the type to second-guess out loud, but in that moment, even Harris could feel the weight of the choice pressing in. Ellis, standing a few paces back, knew what it meant. Alpha Squad was 12 men. Young, newer recruits, positioned as a forward screen. They weren't back yet. No contact. No confirmation. If they were alive, they were cut off. If they weren't, they were already gone. "Command says we move now," Harris repeated. "Orders are to consolidate and pull." Mason looked out toward the fog. There was nothing to see. Just the whisper of trees and the taste of iron in the air. He keyed the radio mic. But he didn't speak right away. The seconds passed, 8, 10, maybe longer. Harris shifted uneasily. The other officers waited. The weight of a decision like that doesn't fall evenly. It sinks hardest into the man who must give it. "Redirect fire support to Sector 3, Mason finally said. "We're going in for Alpha." "Sir," Harris said carefully, command was explicit. "I heard them. But get your men ready. That's an order." He didn't raise his voice. He never did. But the way he said it made every soldier in earshot move without question. Ellis turned and jogged back toward his team. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. The general had made a choice. In a world of probabilities, intel, and hard calls, he chose not to leave them behind, not yet. And as the fog thickened again, swallowing the outlines of men and trees, the first artillery burst cracked the air in the distance. They were going back in. The forest erupted before they even reached the ridge. Not a full ambush, more like scattered gunfire from shifting positions. The kind meant to confuse. To bait. The fog didn't lift, but the sound cut through it like glass. Bursts of automatic fire, distant shouts, and the low thump of mortars echoing off wet earth. General Mason crouched near a fallen log, radio pressed to his ear, face still. Not frozen, but focused. Around him, officers were adjusting maps, trying to make sense of the terrain. No one had eyes on Alpha Squad. No one had heard from them in over 3 hours now. The last ping was a static-laced attempt to report movement. Then, nothing. Lieutenant Harris came up fast, rifle slung, face pale. "Sir, perimeter recon's back. They say there's no clean path. Insurgents have us triangulated. If we press east, we'll expose the rear. We won't hold the line." Mason didn't answer right away. Then he reached for the mic. His voice was calm, like it always was. But there was a finality in the cadence now. "Bravo and Charlie, hold position. All indirect fire shifts to Sector 3. Burn a corridor between the tree line and the riverbed. I want smoke cover in 30 seconds. "Sir," Harris said, voice tightening. "If we move now, into that, there's no extraction point. We'll be surrounded in minutes." "I'm aware." Another pause. "Alpha Squad is still out there." Harris swallowed. "We don't even know if." "They're still mine," Mason said. That was the only answer. Ellis, now behind the second platoon, heard the command crackle through the handsets. His gut tightened. He knew what it meant. They were going to breach the edge. No artillery buffer. No backup. Just smoke and hope. But no one argued. Somewhere behind them, a private murmured a prayer. Another soldier kissed a metal tag under his vest. quiet rituals. No drama. Just men following orders they didn't need explained. A moment later, the entire company surged forward. Not fast. Not reckless. Just steady. Like they knew what waited but chose to go anyway. Through the smoke, the world narrowed. Visibility dropped to inches. The smell of cordite and soil filled every breath. But the sound was worse. Short bursts of fire. A scream cut too quickly. And above it all, the general's voice in the headset, clear, unwavering, calling positions like it was any other day. But it wasn't. Near the riverbed, they found the first body. Then the second. Alpha had made a stand, stacked ammo crates, defensive arc, proper form. But overwhelmed. Outnumbered. Outgunned. 12 men. All accounted for. All gone. Harris walked over slowly, boots sinking into blood-mixed soil. He didn't speak. Neither did Mason. The general just stood there, helmet under one arm, and looked at the youngest of them, Private Kincaid, 18, from Ohio, still gripping his rifle like he'd been ready to fire again. No orders came next. Because there weren't any left to give. That night, as dusk crawled over the ridge, General Mason recorded a message. Not for the brass. Not for the press. Just a single, unedited radio transmission. His final report. This is General Howard Mason. Alpha Squad located. No survivors. They held the line. We recovered them all. And for the record, they were never left behind. That was my order. And he signed off. Quietly. The message was stored, never broadcast. Archived. Until the day someone pressed play in a courtroom. In the days that followed, the Army called it a tactical tragedy. Official statements used words like unavoidable, fluid conditions, and bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. There were medals issued, letters sent, ceremonies held. But General Howard Mason didn't attend a single one. He submitted his resignation quietly. Declined promotion. Declined commendations. Declined to speak. When asked by the review board if he wanted to submit a personal statement for the record, he simply said, "I already gave it." And then he walked away, from service, from rank, from the noise that follows when people want someone to blame but don't want to hear the full story. He moved to a small town in Oregon. No press release. No interviews. Just a rented house with a flag out front, half-worn boots by the door, and a dog that barked too much. Locals knew he was former military, but most never knew his name. He didn't offer it. But in quiet corners of the military, stories kept circulating. Not loud stories. Just soft mentions from soldiers who had served with him. About how he showed up at funerals he wasn't invited to. How he stood in the back row, never in uniform, hat in hand. How, afterward, he'd leave behind a single coin, pressed flat, engraved with the unit number, and never say a word. The silence didn't shield him from guilt. It was just the only way he knew to carry it. Years passed, and then came the lawsuit. The mother of Private Kincaid filed it. Her name was Mary. 62 years old. Wore pearls and still had her son's prom photo in her purse. She didn't hate Mason. That wasn't what brought her to court. What brought her was a question. Outside the courtroom, she saw him for the first time. The man whose name had been in the papers, on folded documents, inside long, sleepless nights. You made the decision, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Yes, ma'am, he replied, his tone even. I did. Her hand shook slightly as she reached into her purse. Pulled out a worn piece of paper. A letter. It was folded so many times it had torn along the creases. My son wrote this before he left, she said. He said he wasn't afraid. He said he trusted you. That if something happened, he knew you'd do everything you could. Mason's eyes didn't blink. But something changed behind them. Mary didn't wait for him to respond. She just looked at him, really looked, and added softly, "So I had to ask, face to face. Did you?" Mason lowered his gaze for the first time that day. "I did," he said. "Every last thing I could." She nodded once. No forgiveness. No outrage. Just a kind of tired understanding. Then she walked into the courtroom. And he followed, alone. The only leader who had made it back. Still standing. Still carrying what couldn't be shared. After the court adjourned for the day, no one spoke to Mason. Not really. A few attorneys whispered among themselves. A journalist jotted something in a notebook. But the man at the center of it all sat in the hallway, alone on a wooden bench, hands resting on his knees, eyes focused on nothing in particular. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed. Phones rang. Somewhere nearby, a street musician played a slow tune on a saxophone. But inside the courthouse, the air had weight. A quiet that didn't just come from the lack of noise, but from everything left unsaid. Ellis Dunbar waited until most of the hallway cleared before he walked over. He wasn't wearing the same suit he wore on the witness stand, just jeans, boots, and a jacket from a unit they both remembered. He sat down next to Mason without asking. "They didn't let me finish," Ellis said softly. "They cut me off when I started talking about the burials." Mason didn't look over. He just nodded once. Ellis continued. "I wanted to tell them how you carried each one yourself. No delegation. No press. Just you and a tarp. 12 times." There was a long pause. Mason's voice was steady when it came. "That wasn't for the court." "No," Ellis agreed. "It was for them." They sat there a while. No need to fill the space with anything more. Just two men who had been there, in that place, in that fog, who remembered more than they wanted and shared less than people expected. Eventually, Ellis stood. Before he left, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of cloth. "I kept one," he said, holding it out. It was a shoulder patch. Worn. Threadbare at the edges. The emblem of Alpha Squad. Mason didn't take it. He just looked at it, then met Ellis's eyes. "Keep it," he said. "They earned it." Later that evening, Mason returned to his motel room. It was modest. Clean. The kind of place with vending machines in the hallway and faded photos of landscapes on the wall. He sat at the small desk and opened a notebook. Not to write. Just to see the names. 12 of them. Listed in his handwriting. Carefully, precisely. Not because he was meticulous, but because he wanted to get them right. He read each name aloud. Slowly. Like a roll call no one would answer. At the last name, his voice caught slightly. Just a flicker. Then silence again. He closed the notebook. Then, from the nightstand drawer, he took out 12 silver coins. Simple. Unmarked except for a date and a number. He placed them in a small box, one by one. Each with care. Each with weight. Tomorrow, he would drive to a cemetery 3 towns over. He had no speech planned. No ceremony. Just a visit. Like every year. 12 graves. 12 quiet moments. No one would know he had been there. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The courtroom was full, but no one moved. No one coughed, no one shuffled. The only sound was the slow, deliberate turning of the judge's page as she reviewed the last of the exhibits. The lights above buzzed faintly. Outside, the afternoon sun warmed the marble steps, but inside, the air was still and cool. General Howard Mason sat motionless at the defense table. His hands folded. Eyes forward. Face unreadable. Across the aisle, Mary Kincaid sat with a tissue clutched in one hand, the folded letter from her son in the other. She hadn't looked at Mason since the last recess. Not out of anger, just exhaustion. The judge cleared her throat. Not to gain attention. She already had it. But to steady her voice. This court has reviewed the facts, testimony, and evidence submitted in the matter of Mason versus the estate of Private Kincaid and others. The court finds that while the outcome of that mission was tragic, it does not rise to the level of criminal negligence. There was no gasp. No reaction. Just silence. General Mason, she continued, you are dismissed of all charges. Still, no one applauded. He didn't look relieved. He didn't smile. He simply nodded once, stood, and gathered his papers he had never once opened during the proceedings. Mary remained seated. Her eyes on the floor now, lips pressed tight. She didn't cry. She'd already done that, many times, in many rooms. There were no tears left for verdicts. On his way out, Mason passed by her row. He paused, not long enough to be noticed by most, but long enough to matter. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. He just gave a small nod, the kind a soldier gives another at a funeral when there's nothing more to say. She returned it. Barely. And that was all. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but Mason didn't stop. He walked past the microphones and cameras, down the stone steps, and into the sunlight. Alone. No escort. No entourage. Just a quiet man walking away from the noise. Somewhere in the crowd, Ellis Dunbar watched from a distance. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. He just stood there, hand resting on the patch in his coat pocket, and whispered to himself, still carrying them. All the way home. The verdict had been spoken. But there were no winners. No celebrations. Only the echo of a decision that felt more like a surrender to truth than a triumph of law. And as the doors of the courthouse closed behind them, the silence remained. Heavy. Honest. The kind of silence that doesn't ask for applause. It just stays with you. The letter came 2 weeks after the verdict. A formal envelope, stamped with the Department of the Army seal, addressed to Howard Mason's home in Oregon. He opened it slowly, as if the contents weren't a surprise. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, and one velvet-lined box. The letter acknowledged his years of service, his leadership under fire, and his extraordinary moral courage during Operation Silver Ridge. It concluded with a recommendation, unanimous, that General Howard Mason be re-awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. It had been revoked during the investigation. Now, it was his again. He closed the box. Set it aside. And didn't touch it for days. He didn't reject it. He didn't frame it. He just let it sit there on the shelf, unopened, while the seasons slowly shifted outside his window. On a cold morning in November, Mason drove his truck 2 hours east. There was no ceremony planned. No one waiting. He brought with him a folded American flag, a small wooden case, and 12 flat silver coins. At the cemetery, the wind cut through his jacket as he walked across the damp grass. He stopped at the first grave. Then the second. He moved without speaking, kneeling with care, placing a coin at each headstone. When he reached Private Kincaid's grave, he paused longer than the others. He opened the wooden case and removed the metal. It gleamed slightly in the pale light. He looked down at it for a long time. Then he set it on the ground, beside the folded flag. Not as a tribute, but as a gesture. He stood there for a moment more. Then turned to leave. By the time the wind had shifted, the metal was already covered with a light layer of leaves. He never wore it. Never planned to. Because in Mason's eyes, honor wasn't measured by the weight of metal or the ribbon on a lapel. It was measured in what you carried quietly. In what you gave up without fanfare. And in the promises you kept, especially when no one else was watching. That night, back home, Mason sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold. He opened his notebook. The same one with 12 names, still written in the same hand. He didn't add anything new. He just read the names. Out loud. One more time. And then he closed the book. That, for him, was enough. No applause. No spotlight. Just the quiet of a man who did what he could. And carried the rest. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with quiet choices, carried alone. General Howard Mason's journey wasn't one of glory, but of responsibility, of standing firm in silence when no one else would. He didn't fight for medals. He didn't defend himself with speeches. Instead, he carried the memory of 12 fallen men, not on his chest, but in every quiet step he took afterward. This story reminds us that true leadership isn't proven in front of cameras or behind podiums. It's measured in the weight of decisions made when no one is watching, and in the promises kept long after the battlefield goes silent. In a world that often rushes to judgment, Mason's quiet dignity speaks louder than any defense could. He chose to honor others rather than protect his legacy, and in doing so, he defined what honor truly means. Have you ever known someone who carried a burden so silently, you didn't realize how heavy it was until much later? If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with someone who values quiet courage, and subscribe to Legacy of Courage Stories. Because some stories need to be told, not loudly, but truthfully.